So here are the answers to the questions at the end of the previous chapter. Hopefully you've got all these right. So why don't you tick these off before we go on to... Now, let's have a chat about batch and continuous processes. Now, these are not specifically mentioned in the specification. However, some mark schemes and some past questions do refer to them. So let's have a quick look at batch and continuous processes. Now, some industrial processes are batch processes. Now, this means that the product is made in small amounts and it's completely finished off and separated and purified, and then a new process is started. Now, the advantages of this are that there's a low equipment cost because a lot of the process is done manually. But the disadvantage of batch processes is that the rate of production is slow and many people are needed, so this contributes to high labour costs. Continuous processes, as the name suggests, continue around the clock. The process is never stopped. Now, the advantages of this are that they can often be fully automated and the rate of production is high. And because it's fully automated, the labour costs are low. But the disadvantage of this is that expensive equipment is needed. What other products can be made from crude oil? The fractions obtained by fractional distillation can be further processed to make more useful molecules. Now, hydrocarbons can be broken down into smaller chains. This is called cracking. Now, the shorter chains are more flammable, so they're more useful as fuels, which is what there's such a high demand for. Now, cracking is an example of a thermal decomposition reaction. So, there are two basic methods of cracking. Now, both of them start out by vaporizing the hydrocarbons, which means heating them up until they evaporate. Then the vapors can either be heated with steam to a very high temperature, or they can be passed over a hot catalyst. Both of these methods will result in cracking. So what are the products of cracking? Now, long-chain alkanes are cracked to form shorter-chain alkanes, but also alkenes. Now, alkenes are unsaturated hydrocarbons, which means they have double as well as single bonds. They have the general formula CnH2n. And here you can see a comparison of alkanes and alkenes. So if you look at ethane on the left, which is C2H6, and compare it to ethene on the right, which is C2H4, you can see that ethane has only single bonds, whereas ethene has a carbon-carbon double bond. If you look at propane and propene C3H8 and propene C3H6, propene has a carbon-carbon double bond. That's what makes it an alkene. Well, the test for alkenes is to use bromine water, and if the double bond is present, then it decolorizes the bromine water. Now, that's underlined for a reason. The correct word to use is it decolorizes the bromine water. Don't say anything else. Don't say it goes clear or it goes transparent or it changes colour. You can only say it double bond decolorizes bromine water. So an example of cracking, so starting out with a long chain molecule and cracking it, thermally decomposing it to form other shorter chain molecules. We can start out with decane, which is C10H22. With a hot catalyst at 500 degrees, it decomposes into pentane, which is C5H12, and propene, which is C3H6, and ethene, which is C2H4. Now, ethanol is becoming more and more significant as an alternative to fossil fuel. We just looked at that. There are two ways of producing ethanol. We can either start with sugar cane or we can hydrate ethene in the presence of a catalyst. So let's look at these two methods. To make it from sugarcane, we ferment sugar with yeast. And there's the word equation. We start out with sugar. It's fermented with yeast, and the products are carbon dioxide and ethanol. If carbon dioxide, which is a gas, is being evolved, the question might say, what would you see present in the test tube? Well, obviously, if a gas is being produced, you'd see bubbling, wouldn't you? Now, the advantage of using sugarcane as the starting point is that it's renewable. This is a low energy process, and the sugarcane plants will absorb CO2. So here's this idea of being carbon neutral again. The disadvantage is that a large area of land is needed to grow the sugarcane. It's a batch process, so it can be quite slow, and the product must be purified. Now, the other method uses ethene as the starting point. Now, ethene is an alkene, isn't it? Ethene can be hydrated with steam in the presence of a catalyst. And there's the equation for it. C2H4, that's ethene, plus H2O, water vapour, makes C2H5OH. Now, the advantage of this is that it's a continuous process, so it's a high production rate, and the product is pure. We don't have yeast all mixed up in there and bits of sugarcane. Disadvantage is that it uses crude oil as the starting point, so it's not renewable, and this is a high energy consumption process. Now, just a word about the fermentation method. Now, fermentation is a chemical reaction. The sugar has to be dissolved first in water, and then the sugar solution is mixed with yeast, which is a living organism. And if you keep that at a suitable temperature, then the yeast can respire the sugar. It respires anaerobically, and that is the fermentation process. It's an anaerobic respiration. So the products of that will be ethanol and CO2. Okay, so quickly test yourself. Hopefully you've printed out all these notes so you can answer it now and find the answers at the beginning of the next chapter.